Washington's stimulus plan fix the U.S. economy? Here to tell us is Peter Schiff, president of Euro-Pacific Capital and author of Crash Proof. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So a big part of the idea of this stimulus plan from Washington is that we got to get consumers spending money again. And you say that actually the problem we're trying to fix in the economy is consumers need to spend less.
Absolutely. That's part of the solution. You know, the government can't stimulate the economy. Now, in the short run, they can stimulate consumption, but more consumption is the opposite of what we need. And extra consumption will really stifle the economy and the rebalancing that we need to have a viable recovery. We need consumers to spend less so they can save more.
What is the stimulus that Washington should be considering as opposed to what's on the table right now?
Well, the only stimulus would be less government. To understand that government is in the way, that government is a burden on the economy, and the lighter the burden, the easier it's going to be for the market to correct for these imbalances. So if we want real economic growth, which is going to mean more production, it's going to be more factories, and it's going to be more savings, the way to produce that is for the government to shrink. And if we can have the government a smaller burden on society, then it will be easier to get out of this gigantic hole.
Now, one thing that right, left, and center in Washington, at least right now, seems to be convinced of is that the part of the stimulus that has construction, more roads, more bridges, there seems to be a sense that, we really need that stuff and that'll be helpful in the economy. You're not buying that.
Well, maybe we need it, maybe we don't. I'd rather have the market determine what we need than government. But just because we need it doesn't mean we should build it. Because, we're broke, and I don't know if we can afford to make our bridges and our roads fancier or nicer right now. We have other more pressing needs. Sure, it would be great to have nicer roads and bridges when we can actually afford it. The problem is the resources that we would use to rebuild those roads and bridges are probably better needed elsewhere in the economy right now.
Now, you also think, along with lower consumption, there are some people, frankly, who need to lose their jobs for this economy to get healthy again, and some of the programs of the last year have prevented that. But what needs to happen to get us back to where we should be?
Well, I think people need to lose their jobs in certain areas so they can get jobs someplace else. The problem is labor is being poorly allocated right now in our economy. We have people working in areas where they really shouldn't be, and now the government has to subsidize those companies to keep them in business. But what they're really doing is preventing that labor from being more effectively used. I mean, we don't want work for the sake of work. We want work for what it produces and what it leads to. And right now the government is interfering with a more efficient allocation of all of our resources, including labor. But in the short run, there's a transition. You can't get a job in a productive area of the economy without losing the job you have in the unproductive. So there's that frictional unemployment that the government is trying to prevent from happening, and it's doing damage to the economy.
Now, you run a stock brokerage, you're in the financial industry, but you think the financial industry right now has too many people working in it.
Absolutely. Look, we have too many people in financial services. We need to have that industry contract. It is contracting, but the rate of contraction is far slower than it would be without the government. And of course, what the government is doing with all these subsidies and bailouts, I have a small brokerage firm. I have no debt. I didn't make any of these bad investments, yet I'm not getting any of this money from the TARP. It's my larger competitors who lost hundreds of billions who are getting all this money. But if the government allowed all these inefficient, incompetent firms to fail, more firms like mine would be expanding, and we would be picking up the pieces and reallocating the resources. The brokerage industry would contract, but the capacity would be in the hands of more competent managers.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, thanks for having me.
And thanks to you. For OpinionJournal.com, I'm James Freeman.